morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. By the way, Merriweather and Tharp, big part of our coverage next week for SEC Media Days. We are less than a week away from one of the really big events of the summer that certainly kicks things off with the 2025 season. That is next week, but between now and then, we have plenty to discuss today, including a major update on the way for a 5-star target for these Georgia Bulldogs. And the Dogs have a chance to add a 5-star to the 2026 class on Saturday, but there is even more big news about another 5-star in which the Dogs are in hot pursuit of. That comes up here today. Also, area of concern for UGA, and yet in the midst of that, as shocking as it is, given how quiet things have been around the UGA front, one pretty prominent voice within the college football media space is predicting Georgia to win the national championship. Kind of fun. We'll spend at least a couple of minutes on that today. Plus, Terrence Edwards stops by today as well. And at the risk of being too self-serving, a prediction I once made that seemed impossible at the time is at least slightly more probable today than it once was. We'll tell you what that is as well. It's a really fun show. You picked a great day to be with us. We've got your comments, by the way, coming up when we're done on our R.S. Andrews cool down at the end of the show today, too. So all on the table. Glad you were with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up in just a few minutes' time here, there is something that many of us who are Georgia fans love to do. There are those who are not Georgia fans who say we love to do this perhaps a little too much. Maybe they're right. But there is something that we love to do. At least one member of the prominent national college football media is making that thing slightly harder to do today. We'll tell you what that is here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, would you like a little recruiting talk? My guess is you probably would. This is interesting, and it is at least somewhat new. An update on 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson. Now, let's set the timeline here before we kind of dive into the Atkinson stuff. We know for Georgia, there is big work that can be done on Saturday for the 2026 recruiting class. In fact, we mentioned this yesterday, the very real strong possibility that Georgia could add a 5-star prospect like Caden Prothro into the class. That's been a priority name for Georgia for quite some time. Ty Green is also announcing on Saturday, too. That, in its own way, would be a big get for Georgia as well. So there's a chance you had two pretty big commitments on Saturday. But then looking past the weekend, there's always that natural curiosity of what comes next. Well, what we know is eventually coming next is some sort of announcement from the 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson. Atkinson has been, for Georgia, among the most talked about prospects in this 2026 class. Handful of reasons. He plays the position that Georgia always seems to have a great player at. We talked yesterday about the chance, very realistic, that C.J. Allen could become this program's 4th Butkus Award winner. They just always seem to have this sort of guy, very much in, like I said, the Jalen Walker mold would be Tyler Atkinson. So it feels like a really big program fit via the position. You know, it's also a guy that's been very good in the state of Georgia, where most of us live, in the state of Georgia since he was a freshman. So Tyler Atkinson's kind of been in our lives for a very long time. We also see now in this NIL age more national recruiting, which means folks trying to come into Georgia and poach our top prospects here. So that's kind of amplified the Atkinson news. But one way or another, Atkinson's been about the most talked about guy in this class for all the reasons I just mentioned. So here is what's new with Tyler Atkinson today. Yesterday, we got official confirmation of the 4 finalists for Atkinson. You're not surprised by any of this if you're watching it closely. The Atkinson Final 4 includes Georgia, also Texas, also Clemson, and Oregon. So what you have here is Georgia, kind of the major force in this. Obviously, Glenn Schumann has done good things. Not good. Good's the wrong word. He has done great things with players like Atkinson. That's obvious. It's also obvious, if we're being honest, that Clemson as a program has always had a really nice sort of pipeline there to Grayson, leveraging a relationship with former coach Mickey Kahn. Clemson and Grayson have kind of always gone hand in hand. No surprise to see them in the midst of all of this. And you've got Texas and Oregon as very big NIL schools. But if we're being honest here, and more on this perhaps in a moment, the NIL style recruitings that both Texas and Oregon have been a part of in this class thus far, I think it's safe to say here in the class of 2026 that has yielded mixed results. Now, listen, that can change at any time, and we're on guard for anything. But it's just sort of fair to note that, throwing around allegedly the biggest dollars in a lot of the recruiting battles here in the class of 2026, that has not quite worked out the way that maybe the big spenders have hoped for. Maybe those dollars not quite stretching as far as they used to. Perhaps that's the case. I'm not sure. But either way, that's your Final Four of Georgia, Texas, Clemson, and Oregon. It feels like a really good time for us to kind of go back in time here and sort of reflect back on what Atkinson has told our Jeff Sintel, DawgNation.com, about his recruiting process. Now, the thing you care most about is the relationship that Atkinson has with Georgia. So let's go back here. Now, this is a couple of months old now, and so we're obviously on guard for things changing, but the general direction of this statement we don't think is any different now than it was before. The last time Jeff had a chance to interview Atkinson telling Jeff what it is that he likes about Georgia on the event of Georgia being named as one of Atkinson's 4 finalists. Good chance to go back and reflect back on previous comments from Tyler to DawgNation about his relationship with Georgia.
Coach Shu, our relationship is just it's a great relationship. But knowing him since 8th grade and just the relationship we have established, and then I got to talk to Roquan Smith the other day, just to hear from him and the impact he had at Georgia. It just been a great it just more stuff from Georgia keeps coming along, and the relationship with Coach Shu just keeps getting better and better.
So if you could write a script for Atkinson, that's kind of what you would want him to say. We believe that nobody recruits and coaches inside linebackers better than Glenn Schumann does. Atkinson seems to reflect that. We believe that Georgia's longtime presence in the recruitment of Atkinson should be a good thing. Tyler prominently mentions the fact that Georgia has been involved since he was in the 8th grade. If you're scripting this out for Atkinson, that's the way that you would do it. It is also fair to point out, though, that Atkinson and his team, and he has a fully built out, fully developed team. This is a very modern recruitment in many ways. They are sort of writing their own script. And if you go to like Tyler's social media and things like that, you see this, where they are prominently highlighting the relationship that Atkinson has with all 4 of his finalists. In other words, we sort of feel the home state pull, and the fact that this is really kind of a ready-made situation. Atkinson, the player, it sort of seems like the perfect fit for Georgia. But to hear the Atkinson camp tell this and to see how they kind of profess this on social media, they also think he's a good fit for all 4 of his finalists. And really, even back, sort of previous interviews, Tyler was sort of saying very much the same thing. Here's an example from that same discussion with Jeff Sintel.
All my top schools is very tight. Every school is 50-50. There's not one school higher than the other. Every school is 50-50 because the relationship piece has been great, and all the schools I'm looking at have the same plan, so it is very good.
So if I'm being honest, I feel like I do pretty well sometimes in my game predictions, picking a winner and a loser in a football game. I feel like I have a handle on that. If for no other reason, there's only 2 choices, so you got a 50% chance of getting it right as it is. When it comes to a recruiting prediction, I don't know that my predictions are worth very much. I feel relatively confident in Georgia's ability to win this recruiting battle, but I do believe, certainly in the case of a Clemson, we talked about Texas, these are programs I think you still can hear from here. And as we said yesterday, if you had a chance to watch yesterday's show, an interesting development for one of these 4 finalists in the case of Texas is they seemingly went all in on Braden Rouse, another linebacker here from the state of Georgia, and didn't get him. Rouse went to Tennessee. So whatever Texas was allegedly throwing around there was apparently not enough to win that recruiting battle. Now, what does that mean for this? Does that mean there's somehow a deficiency in what Texas is selling to linebackers? Does this mean that Texas is now more desperate for Atkinson and they up the ante even more? We don't exactly know necessarily. It's just worth watching and worth paying attention to. We also don't exactly know when this recruitment's going to come to a close, when the announcement's going to be made, but we certainly get the impression based on the published reporting about these 4 finalists from yesterday that we're nearing the end of all of this, and that announcement from Atkinson could be coming very soon. So we'll keep our eye on that, and as was said, we'll also be looking forward to watching some recruiting stuff play out here this weekend in the case of Tyreek Green and certainly the outstanding tight end Caden Prothrow from Bowden. So that's coming this weekend. Now, that said, let's shift gears to something completely different just for a moment. So there is something that many of us love to do, and it's a little bit of a reflex. I think some folks might call it a tick, but whatever it is, as Georgia fans, there is something that we seem to really like about being doubted. We've talked about this plenty, and some of you also know this, if we're being honest, and friends are honest with each other. Georgia fans don't always have the best reputation with other fans. Now, some of that's just unfair, and some of that's just sort of the natural sniping that goes on. But I would say that there are a lot of, if we're being candid, and we try to be, there are a lot of fan bases who find Georgia fans hard to be around. just kind of putting that out there, and I am probably as guilty as charged as anybody on some of this kind of stuff. One of the things that our opposition does not like about us is that we really fuel off doubt, and we just love it. And look, for us as Georgia fans, this is well-founded. I mean, our origin story in many ways, part of our origin story is the 2022 national championship team, and we've played this, we've had fun with this, the whole Nolan Smith about being 7-5. You know, Kirby oftentimes, you know, he does this too. Like there was the Texas, remember the Texas game in Austin in October where like post-game interview and people were so mad about this. They were so bothered by this. The fact that Kirby was like, whoever it was interviewing, was like, your whole network was doubting us. Like Kirby kind of feeds off of this. It's sort of fun for him. We sort of feed off this. It's sort of fun for us. We like the idea of being doubted. Now, you know, I think sometimes we probably overestimate the value of the so-called bulletin board material. I do. But as a narrative, it's still really fun. In fact, it's so fun, I would say, that reflexively we just sort of play into it whether we mean to or not. And in 2025, we're already doing some of this too because there just seems to be sort of a general level of skepticism about Georgia because Georgia had the temerity not to win the national championship last year. And because Georgia didn't win the national championship, all of a sudden there were a lot of people, concerned trolls, I think is what you'll call this, concerned trolling their way through this conversation of, well, gosh, now that Georgia's not the national champion, are we sure the whole program hasn't just sort of fallen apart? Like there's seemingly some of that narrative out there. And while it kind of annoys us when people say that, it also sort of fuels us to do what we like to do anyway, which is to sort of act like everybody's out to get us. We enjoy that thing. The point in all of this, though, is there is at least one media member, and he's a fairly prominent voice. There is at least one media member who is making this particular narrative slightly more difficult here today. Do you know who Brett McMurphy is? McMurphy, probably most famous for working for ESPN for a good bit of time. I think he actually worked at CBS prior to that. ESPN for a good bit of time. He has been working at the Action Network, which is a gambling outfit. And now he has left the Action Network. He is now at On3. Boy, a lot of movement to On3 these days. But nonetheless, McMurphy moving to On3, he is there. And in his sort of introductory piece as a part of the On3 family, he offered his bowl and playoff projections, including his pick for a national championship, which we can show you on the screen here. Brett McMurphy, now of On3, has picked Georgia to win the national championship, beating Ohio State after having beaten, according to McMurphy, Penn State in the national semifinal and having beaten Clemson prior to that. He's got Georgia's the 3 seed going through Clemson, Penn State, and Ohio State to emerge as the national champion. He's also got him as one of the top 4 seeds, which we presume maybe they win the SEC title there too. So pretty good season for McMurphy, winning an SEC, making the playoff, beating traditional rival Clemson, beating 2 Big Ten knuckleheads in Penn State and Ohio State. I would say we'd take that as an outcome for Georgia here in this particular season. So Brett Murphy sort of pushing back against those of us who, the whole apparatus of the hot take industrial complex, it is all out to get Georgia. Brett McMurphy kind of pushing back against that, the fly in the ointment, so to speak, when it comes to our preferred narrative of Georgia's going 7-5, and the media all hates Georgia. McMurphy kind of pushing back against that. So you may think, well, there's nothing else to be said then. At least somebody thinks Georgia's going to be pretty good. However, I guess the contrarian in me also sort of notices, and maybe this is a sort of only interesting and true if you're kind of in the media world, but you know how, like, if you leave one job and go to a new job, you want to make a big impression on the new job that you're at. And if you're in the sports take business, well, that means you want a pretty big, noticeable take when you take the new job. So to give you an idea of how things are sort of weird in the media world now, the sort of take that perhaps gets you noticed, the take that gets you talked about on a show like this, is picking Georgia to win the national championship. Something that's the sort of off the wall, hey, somewhat surprising, slightly contrarian take. So even in the midst of McMurphy picking Georgia to win the national championship, we can still sort of find a reason why it sort of expresses a larger sense of doubt about Georgia. But nonetheless, McMurphy's a commonly known voice. He's a respected analyst. He's now at On3. And in his eyes, the Georgia Bulldogs are going to be the national champions in 2025. And who are we to argue with that? My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We're glad you're with us. Whether it's video, 10 a.m., radio noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just thrilled to have you as a part of the show today. And by the way, so many of you subscribing to us on YouTube. We always appreciate that. Thank you for being a part of the conversations that we're a part of each and every day for the things that we're doing. We love that. We're glad you're here. In fact, we'll see you this weekend, as I said before, for big reaction and coverage of what could be 2 commitments for the Georgia Bulldogs. We'll have more on that as it comes available. And then huge week next week when it comes to SEC Media Days. And by the way, a big part of our SEC Media Days coverage next week are our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. I'm so happy to have them on this. It gives you an idea of how big, you know, I say this all the time, our people, our sponsors, who I feel a greater sense of loyalty to than really anything in the world, our sponsors, big college football fans. And when Merriweather and Tharp heard about SEC Media Days on tap, they're like, hey, we want to be a part of that. We want to help bring coverage to the audience of all the stuff happening in Atlanta next week. We're thrilled about that. And at the same time, while Merriweather and Tharp loves college football conversations, they also know their role in life is to be a part of conversations that are, to be frank, nowhere near as enjoyable. It's the divorce process for many of you, a scary and confusing one. And yet, let's just face it, the law of big numbers would say, in an audience the size of ours, statistically speaking, there are tens of thousands of you who have perhaps considered this as a possibility for yourself. And you maybe, and I think you should, maybe you've done everything you can to avoid this, but it's just unavoidable. It is an obvious next step for you, and perhaps it was chosen for you with very little input from you. Sometimes that happens too. So in the situations like that, the only thing you can do is the next right thing. And the next right thing, the next best thing for you is to have a conversation with our friends at Merriweather and Tharp where you have a chance to get some of your divorce questions answered. And you can really have, in sort of honest and candid ways, how is this personally going to impact me, and what's the best sequence of decisions I can make to sort of set myself up for the next season of my life, which is obviously what this is all about. And the good news is, no matter where you are in the state of Georgia, you have a chance to kind of get close and get connected with a Merriweather and Tharp attorney. They've got offices all across the state. That now includes Columbus, a brand new office, kind of just introduced for Merriweather and Tharp. That's when their website reflects their expansion throughout the state of Georgia. They are your source for Georgia divorce. Their website is georgiadivorceteam.com. One more time, georgiadivorceteam.com. That gets you in touch with Meriwether and Tharp. If you've got questions about the divorce process, they can provide answers. So if this is your story, first of all, I'm sorry for you. I mean that sincerely. But if this is your story, reach out to Meriwether and Tharp today. Online, georgiadivorceteam.com. That is georgiadivorceteam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we've got Terrence Edwards coming up in a moment. That's going to be a really fun conversation. Also, and the one thing we try not to do around here is be too self-serving because nobody wants to hear that. But there was a prediction that I made a little while ago, a couple of months ago perhaps, that seemed outrageous at the time. It seemed like a pipe dream. But here we are on, what is this, July 10th of 2025, and suddenly this outrageous, off-the-wall, never going to happen prediction seems slightly more probable today than it has in the past. We'll tell you what that's about here coming up in just a moment. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And boy, I love a beach vacation this time of year. Hope you're getting one. And if you're not, I would suggest Daytona Beach is a great place for that. In fact, there's an opportunity for you to get involved in that here right now. And we'll tell you more about that here coming up in just a moment. But let's go around the doghouse here today, presented by Daytona Beach for a moment. Our friends at ESPN.com, they do this sort of thing where they take a survey of their preseason top 25, looking at various issues or just discussion points related to that preseason top 25. And they've done another example of that here this week that I think is worth our time. Area of concern for each of the preseason top 25 teams for ESPN. Now, before I show you what their area of concern is, this is also kind of an interesting divide between, like, say, national media and I would say folks within the bubble of DawgNation, because if I had my man on the street microphone type thing, and if I'm walking up and down the streets of Atlanta where we happen to be or wherever you happen to be, putting my mic in the face of big Georgia fans saying, hey, what's the biggest concern for Georgia here this year? I would say for most fans, that answer, for people who are plugged in and following closely, which most of you are, the answer is going to be more related to something on the offensive side. Some of these are tired topics, but also at the same time, potentially legitimate too. Offensive regression in 2024 compared to 2023, issues related to the offensive line, running game struggled. It's okay to put new quarterback into that conversation, although generally speaking, we're pretty high on Gunnar Stockton. But those would be issues that most fans would bring up. It is interesting to note, though, the sort of 10,000-foot view of this, the national survey coming from ESPN, reflects a completely different issue on the other side of the ball. It's no less important. It's just not as prominent and top of mind, I would say, for the typical Georgia fan. Let me read this to you. ESPN saying the biggest area of concern for Georgia is related to its pass rush. Mark Schleybaugh, who knows Georgia well, writes, the Bulldogs lost 6 veteran contributors on their front seven on defense. None more important than edge rushers Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams and Chaz Chambliss. Walker and Williams were first-round picks in the NFL draft, and Chambliss was an unheralded contributor over 4 seasons. They combined for 18 sacks and 28.5 tackles for loss in 2024. Making matters worse, Damon Wilson, a projected replacement on the edge, transferred to Missouri. Schleybaugh goes on to write at ESPN.com, Georgia feels good about Gabe Harris, and it added Army transfer Elo Mudozi, who had 6.5 sacks for the Black Knights last season. So Schleybaugh is a guy we like. We have respect for him. And he says the biggest area of concern for Georgia is related to its pass rush. Now, this is to me one of those interesting topics, and we can take that down. This is to me one of those interesting topics where I sort of find myself always pushing this. The belief, the thought that kind of uncharted territory, the sort of final frontier, I would say, for Georgia, is related to just being kind of a dominant pass rush on a consistent year-to-year basis. That's one of those things I've sort of always believed in. I feel like Georgia, at its best, has included a great pass rush. And lo and behold, it is just really hard to get Kirby Smart to agree with that. And obviously I know, Kirby Smart knows, there aren't numeric ways to quantify how much more Kirby knows about football than I do. Of course, that's the case. But just sort of my rudimentary understanding of the game, I see the best teams, the college, the NFL, even the high school level, getting after quarterbacks and getting that quarterback on the ground. I see Georgia at its best when it's doing that too. But Kirby's viewpoint on defense has just sort of always been a little bit different. And obviously, in total, the success that Kirby's had on that side of the ball, of course, it speaks for itself. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here for a moment. So Schleybaugh mentions, boy, you lose Mykel Williams, you lose Jalen Walker. Ask yourself this: when did we truly see them at their best last season? Now, for Walker, it was mostly over the course of the full year. He, of course, won the Buckus Award. For Williams, though, the game in which he was undeniably at his best was also a game in which Walker was just a game wrecker too. That's at Texas last October. Do you remember that? Like, the reason why Georgia built the big lead near the beginning of the game and kind of rode that to a victory is they made life on Quinn Ewers just absolutely miserable. I mean, they were all over him. And then they put Arch Manning in the game briefly, and he had an even worse experience. And as a quick aside here, you would almost suggest that the people who have now touted Arch Manning as the greatest quarterback of all time, perhaps they didn't have cable the day that game was on, or they didn't have access to a streaming platform, or however it is you watch these things in 2024. Apparently they didn't see that game, that Manning was no more successful than Ewers was in terms of handling the relentless Georgia pass rush on that particular day. That was the Georgia pass rush at its best. And as someone who's relatively obsessed with this topic, I loved it. I mean, I was on cloud nine watching my team go into Austin, arrogant fans. They believe they're going to take over the SEC, and Georgia just bullied them with the pass rush. Great day to be a Dog fan. We all remember it. And yet, even on that particular day, when the Georgia pass rush, which ESPN now says is the biggest area of concern for this year, even on a day when the Georgia pass rush was dominant, you still can't quite get Kirby Smart to sort of buy into how important that is, to the extent that I believe that to be the case. Even when he had all the reason in the world to celebrate his pass rush, Kirby is just kind of more interested in some other stuff from a defensive perspective. Let me give you an example. This is Kirby post-Texas last year, certainly giving credit to the pass rush, and then quickly pivoting to what he thought was even more important than that. This is Kirby Smart.
Quarterback holding the ball, I think, the biggest thing was not knowing what we were in every play and affecting the timing of the routes. We got good pass rushers when they can go. The bigger factor in the game was the inability to run the ball, because we felt like if they could run the ball, it's going to be tough if they were able to do that. They really never established the run, and that's what this league is. That's what you got to do in this league, because if you can't do that, it makes you more one-dimensional.
So look, Kirby has every reason to be like, yeah, man, we got a great pass rush. Look at what we did today. He's the defensive-minded head coach. He could take a bow. He could accept a pat on the back. He could do that. And yet, he sort of pivots away from that pretty quick at the beginning of that clip, essentially attributing the large number of sacks that Georgia amassed that day to the fact that Ewers was just, and by the way, NFL scouts apparently agree with this too, that Ewers was just holding on to the football too long. That Ewers, by the way he was playing, was making sacks more possible. In other words, kind of diminishing, at least somewhat, what Georgia accomplished that day. And then after kind of paying the lip service to the fact that, yeah, we got a good pass rush, we're able to do that, pivoting to what he thought was even more important. But did you see the way we stopped the run? Saying that if we let this team run the football, then we're really in trouble. Now, we all know that's true too. And Kirby said this during spring practice. We believe this is the case. That Georgia can get back to Georgia by being a run-stopping machine again this year, the way that Kirby Smart teams typically have been. The way the last couple of years, kind of not quite so much. So we understand where Kirby's coming from when he says, if we'll stop the run, then we feel like we're kind of fine with no matter what. All of a sudden, our sack total actually looks plenty good as long as we're stopping the run. From a football-centric standpoint, that's probably true. I'll begrudgingly admit that. And we hope to see Georgia kind of getting back into the sort of elite category when it comes to being a run-stop team here this year. But here's the one thing I can't quite fully let go. And to all the people who want to like shrug off the sack total is overrated, sacks don't really matter, other things are more important. Like, here's the one thing I can't quite forget. The biggest sack total that Georgia has had in the entirety of the Kirby Smart era, it obviously came in 2021, historic defense. Georgia's always had good defense, but on that particular year, they had sort of a collection of superheroes. They were the defensive version of the Avengers, one of the great defenses of all time. They had 49 sacks in that particular season. And I know what you'll say, well, they had 5 first-round picks and all that. Like, I totally get that. But I do think if you look at how Georgia produced an elite sack total that particular season, I think it gives you an interesting blueprint here for this upcoming year. Thing number one, there was no double-digit sack guy. Yes, you had the number 1 overall pick in Trayvon Walker, but Walker only had 6 sacks in that particular year, which is not a bad year, but it's not a huge stat total type year. Conversely speaking, a lot of the sacks that Georgia got didn't come from kind of the edge rushing spot. In fact, the team leader in sacks that year was Robert Beal, who played the outside linebacker. He had 6.5, but just below him was Nakobe Dean, who had 6. Channing Tindall had 5.5. And then you had a collection of guys getting 3.5, 3. In other words, you had an ensemble cast producing that year. Not all of them were edge rushers. Some of that was coming from interior pass pressure, the likes that Channing Tindall and Nakobe Dean provided. So that to me is a really interesting blueprint for this upcoming season. I don't expect Georgia to get 49, and I don't expect this Georgia defense to be as good as the 2021 defense was, but I do think it can be better than the last couple of Georgia defenses have been. And I don't disagree with Schleybaugh that an improved pass rush would be a great way to get there. Not easy to replace not easy to replace Jalen Walker, and not easy to replace Mykel Williams. And honestly, Chaz Chambliss' numbers a year ago, you could win a bar bet by asking people how many sacks that Chambliss had last season. It is way more than most people realize. It just is. But even all that said, I think the pathway is there for Georgia to get that improved pass rush here this season. Perhaps a little creative, using some inside linebackers a little bit. Georgia's got more good ones there than anybody does. Kind of spreading it out across the entire, collection of guys who will play. In other words, I don't disagree with Schleybaugh that he'd like to see improvement from Georgia in that area. And as much as Kirby Smart sort of focuses on other things, and obviously great success when those areas of focus do kind of come to fruition, wouldn't mind hearing him talk a little bit more about the pass rush too, because, boy, the very best version of Georgia defensively certainly seemed to have plenty of that. And that is Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily today, brought to you by friends at Daytona Beach. So it's the summer. You see all those like social media pics. Your friends are going on vacation. They're going to the beach. They're all, sort of sending their glamour shots back and putting them on their feeds of all the fun stuff they're doing. And you may be sitting there thinking, okay, I don't have a beach vacation plan right now. I don't have that for my family right now. And maybe your wife, kids, maybe they're kind of reminding you that you don't have that going for them right now. Well, the good news is there are so many options available for you at Daytona Beach right now. Gorgeous place, all kinds of wonderful hotel, resort lodging opportunities, and there's some great savings on this too, even in this summer time of year. So if you'll check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals, this is a great chance to sort of a last-minute trip to Daytona Beach and take advantage of the 23 miles of shoreline. If you want to fly there, International Airport right there at Daytona Beach. Great restaurants. You like the parasailing and the fishing and all the things you can do outside. You know it for the Great American Race, but there's a whole lot more than just motorsports happening at Daytona. In fact, it's time for you to find out for yourself. Online, DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. Great to have Daytona Beach as a part of Around the Doghouse. All right, without further ado, a lot going on with Georgia football right now. Nobody knows it better than our guy, the legend of Georgia, Terrence Edwards. Let's talk to him on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great sense of pride for me. We talked about this with John Stinchcomb the other day, and we typically keep it pretty kayfabe about referencing other Georgia websites, but our friends over 24/7 Sports did put out their all-quarter century team of the last 25 years. Terrence Edwards manning one of the wide receiver positions. Terrence, I saw that. I was thrilled to see it. Obviously, your legendary career lives on in folks' memories. So let me extend some congratulations for you, given the fact that, since you played at Georgia, there have been multiple SEC championships. There have been, a couple of national championships. There have been some very good players, and yet the Terrence Edwards career stat line still holds up. A member of the quarter-century team here at Georgia, according to at least one media outlet there. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we all like to feel appreciated for what you did for the university. And I'm just looking at it thinking 23 years since I donned the red and black, and I'm still the leader of most catches, most touchdowns, most receiving yards in a single season, still top 4 in SEC history. So, it's a contribute to the work that I put in and my teammates. And I like to also thank Coach Dunning for recruiting me and Coach Rick just taking me over the top in my career. So it's a lot of people that, I like to thank for that, but it's still an honor to be mentioned up there with still some of the greats.
I was away from work last week, and I like to read magazines. I'm just sort of an old, what you call old man on the porch a little bit when it comes to stuff like that. And I was reading a golf magazine, and Tiger Woods was quoted in the magazine saying that he can't get his son to listen to anything that he's trying to tell him to do when it comes to golf. Now, Charlie Woods is obviously a very good golfer, but his dad is Tiger Woods. And I sort of think, well, if Tiger Woods can't get his son to listen to him about golf, then the fact that I can't get my kids to listen to me, all of a sudden that starts to make a little bit more sense. But my point here is you're also teaching wide receivers and stuff like that. And so when they want to sort of shrug you off and kind of do it their own way, to be able to sort of hold that, graphic up and say, hey, listen, if you're twice as good as you are now, you still may not be as good as I was back then. Every now and then, just to sort of have that card in your pocket when you're trying to get young folks to listen to you, it's not a bad thing to have, right?
It's not. And I was thinking to myself the other day, I was like, the Terrence Edwards, the football player, was pretty good. But I think Terrence Edwards, the coach/trainer, is even better. I didn't have anyone to teach me the position like I teach it now.
Yeah.
So I'm just happy that I've learned and had a lot of great coaches throughout my time. Now I can teach this position, but I tell them all the time, it's not arrogance, it's not confidence, but if you don't want to listen to me, you can Google my name and you can see a lot of accolades attached to my name.
I do love that, and I think you also bring up a good point too. And you see this reflected on what the game looks like on Friday nights. Georgia high school football has never been better, not just because of the athleticism. The quality of play is just really, really sharp. And I do think what you say is true. Now, when we were growing up, obviously we had high school coaches dedicated to the sport, and I'm thankful for those men across our state. But the level of sort of precise, particular position-based training that's become more popular in like the last probably 20 years, I would say. I mean, there's no doubt that's had a huge impact on the game, the players, where the quality of play is just so much higher because the level of coaching is just becoming more specialized now. And I think everybody's kind of benefiting from that, I believe.
I think so. It's definitely specialized, and parents are seeking this specialized attention early ages. I mean, I had people reach out to me and ask about, can you train my 9-year-old? I can, but that's a little bit too young. But people are reaching out, trying to get specialized training, and that's something that we didn't have. I think we learned how to play just in the backyard, playing throw them up, bust them up, or in the roll, and trying to get out the street when the car is coming. That's how we taught ourselves how to play football. But today's age, there are so many trainers/coaches that are teaching these young men the fundamentals of the game at such an early age, and they're so much advanced than we were coming out of high school.
So to talk about Georgia here for a moment, I'm always picking your brain about wide receivers and things like that. Let me talk about the other side of the ball for a moment, because before you joined us, I was talking about I'm just a big fan of pass rush. I just love to watch my defense get the opposing quarterback on the ground. To me, there's nothing in my mind more disruptive than that. And yet, Kirby Smart's had great success. Obviously, unprecedented success. I would say that with his language and with his seeming points of emphasis, he's just not quite as into that as some other coaches sort of seem to be. And obviously Kirby's results speak for themselves. Yet in 2021, when Georgia was at its absolute apex, they had 49 sacks that year. As a coach yourself, and I would say kind of an offensive-minded coach, how important do you think pass rush is for the overall success of a defense?
Oh, I think it's up there with interceptions. I think just the momentum that a sack can carry. Uh, it's one of those stats that it's not taken, and it's not necessarily getting a sack. It's the pressure that comes along with it. And the biggest component I think people don't talk about as much as the pass rush is the biggest help to a secondary. You can only cover for so long, but if you have a pass rush that's not necessarily getting sacks, but rushing the quarterback and the receivers and the DBs does not have to cover as long, that's the best help for a secondary, is getting a pass rush that can get to the quarterback and not necessarily getting the sacks. That it just helps overall. I love a defense that could get to the quarterback. I mean, if you just think about the Ole Miss game for us last year, I think that's where they beat us, is we couldn't block them, and the morale of the team goes down when you just see play after play. Your quarterback's getting hit, and then from a defensive standpoint, that's a great neutralizer, is being able to get to the pass rush without sending or committing extra bodies to the pass rush.
And to be more, clear from my own point of view here, I mean, obviously the Georgia coaches do want pass rush. They like sacks. I think what they would say, though, is, and you as a coach, you understand this, they don't want like cheap sacks, because there's clearly a way to sort of game the defense that would produce more sacks and may even produce more individual statistics for the guys who kind of want those. But you're putting the secondary in harm's way now. All of a sudden now you're putting them out there on an island where they're going to be attacked repeatedly, and no defensive back's going to hold up to that over the course of a whole game. That there is a way to seek pass pressure and ultimately sacks that also leaves you more explosive to big plays. And obviously this Georgia coaching staff is allergic to giving up big plays, as any good defensive coach would be. So if they were really here and sitting around the table and we're all having this conversation, I think their perspective would probably reflect that, well, of course you want to get the quarterback on the ground, but you just can't do it in some sort of cheap way that leaves yourself vulnerable to something else.
Yes, at the end of the day, pass rush is normally a one-on-one type deal. There's only one, if you're in a four-man front, there's only one guy that can be doubled. So essentially everyone else is in a one-on-one situation. I love to have guys that can beat their guy one-on-one without having to manufacture plus one blitzes. And that's just bringing more guys that you can block. Now you're putting your secondary in a position that they're vulnerable, because in today's game, in today's offense, I don't care if you got like a secondary for the Champ Baileys, at some point you're going to give up a big play. And that's something that the staff do not want to do. But if you could get guys that could beat their guy one-on-one in pass rush situation, that would be the ideal situation to put in. And that's when you become a dominant defense.
We found out this week that Gunnar Stockton is going with Georgia next week to SEC Media Days, which in the kind of inside baseball type conversation we sometimes have, this is interesting because Georgia does not always send quarterback to media days, and Kirby Smart doesn't always really name a starting quarterback. He just sort of goes, with his own internal process there on that. But by sending Stockton to media days, it's about as close to naming him as starter as Georgia's ever going to do. But it also, I think, at least my read on this is, it reflects a level of confidence that Georgia has in him that maybe Georgia doesn't always have. For instance, they didn't take Carson Beck to media days in 2023. And I'm not picking on Carson. I'm not saying anything deficient about him. I'm just saying it's not always Georgia and Kirby's process to do this. And so we have kind of read into, hey, maybe Kirby more confident in Gunnar than some of the media around this sport seems to be in Stockton going into his first year. What do you make of the fact that Gunnar Stockton will be selected as a spokesman for Georgia next week when everybody gets together for SEC Media Days?
Knowing Kirby the way I do, he's always thinking two steps ahead of everyone. So just for me, he's sending leaders. I think Gunnar is a leader of the team. I think that shows confidence in Gunnar. That shows to the team that I believe in Gunnar as the head coach, and he wants the team to believe in him as well. And I think the team does believe in Gunner. I think Gunner is a leader of men. I think the team will rally behind Gunner. So I think that Kirby is just showing that the level of confidence that he have in his quarterback. And I love that he's sending Gunner. Gunner is going to be the CEO of this team. Like you say, he's haven't named Gunner the starter, but sending Gunner there is a telltale sign that Gunner's probably going to be our starting quarterback game one. And I'm going to show confidence in him. And I think it's also Kirby's exuding confidence into Gunner as well. Like, Gunner, I believe in you. So if nobody else does, your head coach believes in you. And that could go a long way for a player, especially when your head coach believes in you. And like you said, he didn't send Carson, who was the #1 quarterback, but he's sending me because he believes in my talent. So I think it's one of those things where the head coach is showing what he believes into. And he believes this strongly into Gunner that's sending him to media day. And that's what I believe he's doing.
And you said something else I think is really important there too, which is the sense that I get, and I'm obviously not on the inside, but I try to follow this and watch it closely and talk to people who are more inside than I am. It seems like the team likes Gunner, and I know that's when I really kind of came to believe that something special could be brewing for Georgia in 2021, where, it seemed obvious as that season progressed and Stetson Bennett, at the time controversially, was kind of being selected as Georgia's quarterback, that the team believed in Stetson. And Look, Terrence, you know what it's like to sort of sweat through a practice and you're putting your body on the line. Like, players know more about each other than any of us could ever know about a team. There is just something about lining up next to somebody or across from somebody where you just know the truth in a way that, people like me will never be able to be aware. And it just sort of felt like that team in 2021 knew something about Stetson Bennett. They trust him, even kind of sight unseen for the rest of us. And I'm not saying Gunner's the next Stetson. That's a lot to live up to. But I do think Gunner going next week to media days, as you kind of alluded to and touched on, perhaps it also reflects the extent to which this Georgia team likes Gunner, because if they're not sure about him, I don't think there's any way Kirby's sort of dragging him in front of the media next week.
Yes, I told my team yesterday after workouts that workouts are hard. It's supposed to be hard. If you have never done it, you do not understand how hard it is. And when you look over to your left and to your right, you're looking at a person that you're going to go into, and I don't want to use this phrase, like into battle with. Somebody that when it gets tough and when it gets hard, can you count on the man next to you? And when you don't believe in the man next to you because he quits or he's not giving his all, you can't trust him in a foxhole when it gets tough. And I think Gunner is a guy just like Stetson, and the people see it. You got 105 athletes out there putting their all, and you got one guy that's not contributing to their best, to the betterment of the team. Then the team kind of resents you a little bit because we are out here kicking our butt for the best of Georgia football, and you're out here being selfish in the betterment of your own selfish reasons. And team sees that, and I told my team that yesterday because there is going to be time where you're going to need your brother beside you, and you don't know 100% if that brother's going to show up because he didn't show up in a winter workouts.
Let me finish with this on a maybe more serious note than the game on the field. One of your former coaches, Mark Richt, shared this morning on social media that his father, Lou Richt, passed away yesterday. Obviously, I know what Coach Richt means to you. You said that plenty of times before. Did you meet Mr. Richt, his father, at any point in time? And it seems like a good time to sort of reflect back on the impact the Richt family has made on Georgia football, players like yourself that played during the Richt era. Obviously, folks have the Richt family in their prayers all the time for a number of reasons. But did you know Coach Richt's father at all? And did Coach Richt talk much about him during your time with him there at Georgia?
I don't remember much about Coach Richt's father. I'm pretty sure he was around. But just for my recollection right now, I don't remember him very well. But we are all just praying for the Richt family to just have, the ease and the wherewithal of just, he's in a better place. Um, so I'm just praying for the Rick family. Uh, we all understand and love the Rick family. We
Yeah.
love Coach Rick. I know I've said this plenty of times of how much he means to me. So I will send him a text later, just praying for him, tell him I love him and thanks. And every time I get opportunity, I just thank him for what he did for me.
No, I think that's great. And obviously, we know Coach Richt himself is battling Parkinson's. And, Terrence, I know you had a chance to be with him at the Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame event, 2 years ago? And, I've seen him, been with him out in public a couple times since then. I tell you, it's amazing. I know that it's a fight, right? I mean, he's having to fight like crazy just to kind of, it's just a daily battle. But I tell you, there have been a couple times, in public with him recently where I think that he's done a great job of making everybody there feel really special and comfortable. And he's been just sort of the best version of himself. It's really, really inspiring for me to watch just how courageous Coach Rick's battle with this Parkinson's, obviously a horrendous disease, is, and just how strong he has the ability to make himself appear in public, which I know is not an easy thing to do. We obviously do the bowling event with him. He spoke at some churches, things like you just sort of see him out doing some stuff, and it's just amazing the level of strength he's able to conjure to be out in public, because people still want to hear from him. They still want to have that opportunity to kind of rub elbows with him. And I know it's not easy. I'm sure there's some fatigue associated with that, but it's just amazing to me how strong he's able to, allow himself to be when that public moment requires it.
Yes, that's one thing that if you don't know about Coach Rick, he's a fighter. He's a believer. So he's just going to continue to put himself out there for the greater good. And if his story and his testimony can help someone else, he's going to go out and speak it as loud as he can. And that's just the human being that he is. So we all love him. I thank him. And he's going to continue the good fight. And I love him for that.
Beautiful video, by the way, on DawgNation.com and our DawgNation video feed right now of our event with Coach Rick last fall. Terrence, it's great to talk to you. We love all of that. And as we mentioned at the beginning, obviously you're doing great work as a wide receivers coach here right now. For those who want a little bit more from you, Terrence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy. Now, we're coming up on the start of the season, so obviously that's going to get, time's going to be pretty scarce, but you're still out there sharing stuff on social media. You're, kind of providing all kinds of value to people. If they want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yes, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, we appreciate you. Thanks for your time here today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from Terrence Edwards, and I think really strong words there on Coach Richt. And obviously, sad for him, the loss of his father. And, of course, we know we dealt with that with Coach Smart, loss of his father back near the beginning of the year. And, stories like this of coaches that we revere also kind of brings up our own kind of personal experience with stuff like that. So certainly the emotion of life creeps into football on a pretty regular basis. And Coach Richt, an example of that. We send him prayers. We wish him well. And I'll encourage you to check out his message on social media, on X in particular is where I saw it. Just very, very well stated, very, very clear message about the peace that he has about his father's passing. It's worth you checking out for yourself if you have not seen that. Now, let me make a transition and go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we're going to do another Royal Caribbean themed Golden Shoe here a little bit later on, because I do love the connection we make with those who become kind of a part of our DawgNation cruise family. And it is amazing to me, it's like, for whatever reason, the thing that people most know about me, to the extent that anyone knows who I am, the thing that people most know about me is Georgia football. I would say the thing that people sort of know the second most about me is Royal Caribbean Cruises. It's just kind of funny the way that sort of goes. And we do love the experience we have on Royal Caribbean Cruises. I personally love that. I love the fact that I've been able to share this with so many of you. And I do love the fact that, like, if I meet people out in the world, first thing they'll say is, how's Georgia going to be this year? And second thing is, BA, one of these years, I'm going to come on that DawgNation cruise. Well, listen, I think this year is a great year to do it. Utopia of the Seas is an amazing ship. We're going to be back on it in April, and you can be a part of the memories that we're making each and every year. If you want the deepest the most rich experience, the richest, I guess is the word, richest experience we're able to provide to our Dog Nation family. This Dog Nation cruise is it. It is this upcoming April. Jessica Slater, wonderful travel advisor, who honestly I just call all the time. Jessica's helped get me out of so many jams because I have a tendency to sort of travel at the last minute. I'm kind of a disorganized mess, and she's just great. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let's talk about this for a moment. We do a pro-Georgia show. Of course, that's the case. It's DawgNation Daily. And I think that sometimes people have a little bit of a misunderstanding about the perspective that a fan has when they talk about their own team. I think the general perception is that fans have a tendency to inflate their own team. And sometimes that's the case. You can think about the knucklehead, fan bases that you know of. There's a lot of this that's going on of like, what's the meme of they've got the Alabama sense of pride with the Vanderbilt trophy case. Like there's some of that goes on. But that's not the sole kind of way that fans sort of reflect their fandom. We may at times overinflate, the strengths of our team or the opportunity for success for our team. But I also think we have a tendency to sometimes overly fixate on the blemishes too, the imperfections. We have a tendency to kind of amplify that in our mind larger than it possibly should be. So I want to kind of give you an example of this here for a moment. Like we started the show, or at least near the top of the show, talking about, hey, issues for Georgia. What are you concerned about? And we kind of rattled through what the average Georgia fan might talk about. And because we're a Georgia-centric, some would say Georgia-obsessed show, we have talked so much about all that kind of stuff. But we almost forget, though, that if we were doing Texas Nation Daily or Bama Nation Daily, shudder the thought, but if we were doing those shows, those fan bases, those teams, they also have their areas for concern. That if we kind of look at Georgia and say, boy, the whole season could be derailed if this isn't better, I think sometimes we forget there are also things for other teams that have the potential to derail their seasons as well. We don't necessarily know as much about that because we don't live in that world. We're several hundred miles away from some of these teams. But they are no less, true. They exist just as much as anything related to Georgia does. So let me kind of rattle through a couple of these. I'm going to try to do this kind of quickly. Like, do you know how much Texas lost off its offensive line a year ago? And a lot of this is coming from the same ESPN story that I read from as it relates to the Georgia pass rush a little earlier. Do you know how much Texas lost off its offensive line a year ago? 4 starters last year. We're talking about Georgia replacing guys like the very good Dylan Fairchild, the very good Tate Ratledge, obviously a high draft pick Jared Wilson. We talk about that. Texas also replacing 4 starters off a very good offensive line for a year ago. Texas is like Georgia in that they believe they have talented players waiting in the wings. But there are Texas fans on their message boards and, shows, whatever it is they have over there. They're also talking about the need to kind of restock and replenish along the offensive line as being a very big issue. And as big an issue as that is for Georgia, it is equally as big for Texas. And I would say the level of certainty about will they or won't they for both teams also should be about equal. Georgia's probably not more likely to do it than Texas, but Texas is also not more likely to do it than Georgia. That is something worth keeping in mind. The defending national champions, Ohio State. Georgia's going into a season trying to figure out, what do you have at quarterback with Gunnar Stockton? We haven't seen Stockton very much. What do you have in him? Y'all, the defending national champions are in no less of a position. If anything, they're in even more so of a position because they're going to likely turn to Julian Sayin as their starting quarterback, who's even younger, even less experienced than what Stockton is. And all of a sudden, the defending champs are going to pin their hopes on a very inexperienced quarterback. So for a lot of the hand-wringing and, to use a phrase I used earlier, concern trolling that exists out there of, are you sure Georgia can be good with a quarterback with this little experience? Well, isn't the same thing also true for Ohio State? And yes, they've got Jeremiah Smith, and he's very, very good. But still, this is a team breaking in an inexperienced quarterback too. That doesn't make the defending national champs in this case all that different than Georgia. We talk about Alabama, for the Georgia need to, as ESPN says, of improving the pass rush. You're asking Alabama to do the same thing a year ago. They were just 13th in the SEC in sacks last year. They need to be better with that as well. Now, maybe they will. They've certainly got some front-end talent. LT Overton, the interior part of that defensive line, for instance, that gives them a chance to do that. But the same way that Georgia kind of finds itself looking to improve in some areas, Alabama's trying to figure that out too. And we would say they're perhaps doing that with a little bit more pressure on them because they suffered that third loss a year ago in the regular season, something that didn't happen to Georgia. Bama missed the college football playoff. So whatever issues Bama's trying to correct, they're doing so with just a little bit more pressure on them to do that. So it's just important to keep in mind, we're a Georgia-centric show. We make a really big deal about everything as it relates to Georgia. We just do. And sometimes that means we exaggerate the faults of the Dogs, maybe more than is warranted. It is important to note, maybe you'll get the preseason magazines or you'll spend more time on the other team's websites and things like that. Maybe it's also appropriate for those of you who want to have the fullest, clearest picture of college football to go look at a Texas or an LSU or some of these teams that are getting some preseason love and say, where are they perhaps deficient? What are their fans worried about? Because everybody is worried about something. All right, let me give you one final thing here, cruising around the SEC, and as it turns out, sort of one final thing for the show. I made a prediction not too long ago that I got a decent amount of grief for, and I don't say that in a bad way. I should get grief every now and then. It's kind of, it's important to sort of, be called out if you say something that's perhaps dumb. And over the course of years, I've said plenty of dumb things, and who knows how dumb of stuff I'll be saying between now and before the season starts. There's perhaps some doozies still on the way. I'm sure there will be. But what I got some grief for the other day is I predicted the possibility of some sort of, and I hate to use this phrase because this just makes people cringe, but federal governmental intervention into college athletics that could chart a path towards a little brighter future for college athletics as we have known it. And I got scoffed at, laughed at for that. BA, that's never going to happen. There are a lot of people who don't think this should happen. They think Congress should be worried about different things, which I don't necessarily agree with, by the way. Anything that makes a lot of people's lives better is generally a pretty nice utility to have. College athletics is that. So I actually think Congress getting involved in protecting an institution that's just makes our lives more enjoyable and frankly provides a source of this is how young people in many cases sort of set themselves up for happiness and success as an adult going through college athletics. We got to try to preserve it for them, if nothing else. So I think this is the exact kind of thing that Congress should be doing, to be honest. But the point is, even if you think that, the idea they could ever agree on this, a body that doesn't agree on much, just seemed impossible. Well, I thought there was a very interesting tweet yesterday from Ross Dellinger, the guy from Yahoo Sports, who's sort of on top of all of this more so than anybody else is. So what he writes is that members of the United States House of Representatives are planning as soon as Thursday, which will be today, to introduce an amended college sports bill called the SCORE Act, sources tell Yahoo Sports. He says, now this is interesting. This is from a guy who reports on this stuff neutrally and more thoroughly than anybody. He says, the act is on track to progress further than any all-encompassing athlete compensation legislation. So in other words, this is not guaranteed to pass. It's not guaranteed to fix everything that's ailed. There's just more movement in this direction than there has been in the past, as I predicted a couple of months ago there would be. Here's how Congress itself describes the bill. It is a bill to protect the name, image, and likeness rights of student athletes and to promote, listen to this phrase here, fair competition with respect to intercollegiate athletics and for other purposes. That's the way the bill is described within Congress itself. This is gaining some steam. We'll see what happens. The point of all of this is the reason why I made the prediction a couple of months ago that I did is because as someone who's not an expert on much, certainly not an expert on how Congress operates, but I do pay very close attention to the mood of the public because I speak to the public each and every day. And what I've noticed related to a couple of the big stories that have popped up so far this calendar year is that it certainly seems like public opinion is on the side of the folks who want to protect the institutions more so than it is on the side of those who want to sort of seek some sort of radical teardown of the institutions as we've known them. And obviously, politicians by their nature, all they care about is what the public thinks, and they try to align themselves with what the public thinks, whether you're this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle. You are beholden to public opinion, at least you should be. You're supposed to be. And so as the public moves in this direction, it just seemed obvious to me that people in Washington were likely to notice. And maybe that's what's happening right now. So I won't make a ton of further predictions on what's going to happen from here. But I do think for those who've watched, what I kind of view as sort of an imposed chaos on college athletics, that we don't hear from the majority of people on this very much. I don't know that the majority of people and their sort of common thought on this is fairly well reflected, frankly, in the media very much. I don't think that's always the case. But Congress seems to be taking notice of this, and perhaps the needed change that many people think should occur, maybe there's still a chance that could happen. This is worth watching. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up the day, how about a fun golden shoe? We told you it would be Royal Caribbean related. We told you yesterday about our good friend Lynn, who, she thinks, she gave me a nice compliment, doing a good job kind of getting people fired up to go on Utopia of the Seas. She said that she was going to go, and now Lynn has shared us some photographic evidence that indeed her and her family are on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. So shout out to Lynn Vietri, who shares this wonderful photo of her family enjoying a little time there at Perfect Day Coco Cay. And I can say this with all honesty. I wish I was there right now. I'm so jealous of Lynn and her family getting a chance to enjoy all of that on board Utopia of the Seas, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. It's sort of the ultimate weekend. Glad to see them enjoying all of that, and hope you get a chance to do that too. So we'll give Lynn and her family golden shoes for that today. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? 1,706 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them for all of that. So let us get some comments. I'm going to start at DawgNation.com, and we'll kind of bounce through the various comment sections after that. And we'll just see what's on people's mind here today. Hope you're all having a great day. We may not go super long today, but we'll see how it goes. Let's see what else. DT says, how can anything be better than being with us knuckleheads? Well, listen, I'm not saying I'd love to do the show. If I could do the show from Perfect Day Coco Cay, I think I might just live there. I think there is actually a guy. I don't know how well this has been documented, but I think there actually is a guy who lives on a Royal Caribbean ship. Maybe one of these days I'll just do that. Maybe one of these days I'll do that. I see comments I cannot read. Let's see what else. Eugene Marine also says he thinks the SCORE Act's going to be tabled, so I wouldn't even sweat it. All we're saying is that, and listen, most legislation in most cases moves slowly. Like, very few things happen very fast, and probably the stuff that happens super fast, not always great. Things have a tendency to happen slowly. But are you familiar with the phrase you sometimes hear online? People talk about being black-pilled when you you've just had so much negativity that all of a sudden now you don't believe positivity is possible. That's how I kind of define that sometimes. I don't think that people should be black-pilled over the future of college athletics. I really don't. In other words, you see a lot of this. You do, where social media, big-time college sports fan will say, I've loved college football my entire life. But boy, I don't know. It's like, I'm not even sure, I'm not even sure I'll still care in a few years. Like, you do see a lot of that. And a lot of people who say that are probably exaggerating. I get that. But I am also someone that over the course of years, when I see some of the stuff that happens, like, I mean, I've described it as imposed chaos. Like, I don't talk very much about my sort of deeply held belief on some of this kind of stuff, but I've also hinted before. I think there's some people who are trying to destroy college athletics on purpose. I just do. And that's really disheartening to think that might be true. But in the midst of all of this, whatever the actual truth is, there are also some people who kind of want to save it. And they may only want to save it because they believe that's what the public wants them to do. But that to me also seems like a pretty good reason to do something. So we'll see. We'll see. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. And like, let me not say that. Let me not say that. Let's see what else. Senior Dog 54 says, who was the guy that came out of nowhere to lead the Rams to a championship? I believe it's about Kurt Warner. Warner, one of the great stories really of all time. It really is. And if you said to me, what is the one team that wasn't your team that was the most fun to watch? The Kurt Warner era Rams might be that for me. That's as much fun as I've had watching a team that wasn't my team. Now, to begin with, they were in the same division as the Falcons, so obviously Falcons fans probably weren't loving the Rams' success. And the fact that it kind of diminished, the Rams came out of nowhere in 99 with Kurt Warner. A year after the Falcons, it kind of came out of nowhere in 1998. So in some respects, that kind of diminished what I think was a legitimate accomplishment. Atlanta going 14-2 and making the Super Bowl that year. Ruined, of course, by Eugene Robinson, but they probably weren't beating the Broncos anyway. But obviously the Rams came out of nowhere the following year, and they took it the next step and actually won the Super Bowl, a game that was actually played here in Atlanta, you may remember. But I had probably as much fun watching the Greatest Show on Turf Rams as any team that wasn't my team probably ever. And what's also interesting, and many of you know this, is that so Warner comes out of nowhere, they win in 99. They get back to the Super Bowl in 2001. Now they're the big favorites. Now they're the known commodity. And guess what? Who came out of nowhere that year? Off the bench after the Drew Bledsoe injury. This is the beginning of Tom Brady's career. So interesting, sort of an interesting kind of story there with that. And then, of course, Warner goes on to also, he got to a Super Bowl with the Cardinals too. So no flash in the pan, no one-hit wonder, a guy with zero football background prior to that, wins a Super Bowl and played in two others. Do I have that right? And is in the Hall of Fame. Is Kurt Warner in the Hall of Fame? Should be. UJ Marine also pointing out that Troy Aikman, I don't know, we're all kind of all over the place here right now, was a wishbone quarterback in high school. How many people remember, the college career of Aikman just in general is kind of a long time ago now. But for those who are even alive to remember Aikman at UCLA, became the number one overall pick for the Dallas Cowboys. How many people remember that Aikman, kind of way pre-transfer portal, as we understand it now, began his career at Oklahoma? Do people know this? Barry Switzer option style, and then ended up at UCLA. And I think, by the way, very good analyst. I do think Aikman is just a really, like the Buck Aikman team, I just think is just sharp as a tack. I really do. Randy Hall asking about baseball. Yes, son's still out there playing baseball, loves it. I was watching him yesterday. He's having a lesson, and so he actually, it's just amazing to watch somebody who really loves what they're doing, because it was 115 degrees. It was so hot, but he's out there just loving it and having a great time. And to me, that's what it's all about, right? It's like, I love to watch my kids love what they're doing. That's what I really want. There's all kinds of like negativity out there right now about what youth sports is, and I do get where some of that comes from. I really do. In our house, the one thing we try to take very seriously is that we're doing this for the fun of doing it. We have really no more objective other than the experience of being a part of the sport. We are playing the sport for the sake of playing the sport. And for my daughter, for the things that she's into, my son for what he's into, it's just really fun to watch them. It's fun to watch them do that. It's great. It's great. Let me go to YouTube here for a moment. Let us see. What else? Chris Jacobs shouting out Adrian Peters from Georgia Southern. So this is not the same Adrian Peters. Many of you know this. We're just going to go back and sort of relive old football things, which is actually fine for me. I can do that all day long. Most of you probably could too. So there was Adrian Peterson, obviously the legendary Oklahoma running back who went on to be the face of the Minnesota Vikings for a long time. A completely different Adrian Peterson, who also had an NFL career up for the Chicago Bears, was running back at Georgia Southern, and he was like a Bo Jackson video game type player. I mean, he just was. The game I remember for him, this is back when what was known as, it's FCS now, 1AA at the time, when Georgia Southern was against, I think it was Youngstown State. This is the team that Jim Tressel coached. Youngstown State. I think that's who it was in the at the time 1AA national championship game. He's like stiff arming people and he's running past people like he was just. It was just the wildest thing. Which that would have been when Paul Johnson was coaching. It would have been when Paul Johnson was still the Georgia Southern coach, right? It's kind of funny, I always probably liked Paul Johnson before he became the Tech coach because I've always kind of liked option football a little bit. This would have been like Peterson at Georgia Southern was the Paul Johnson era, right? I think that's right. Jeremy Arbin says he thinks that Peterson helped him win 2 national titles. And I think that's probably true. Obviously, they won several down there in Statesboro. This is also back when they had a really fun rivalry with Furman. Georgia Southern and Furman had a great rivalry during that time. John Hayes says our offensive line injuries last year are a blessing in disguise. It allowed us to generate more experience for the 4 returning veterans and key backups as they got much more practice reps than otherwise. That may turn out to be true, John. That's a good point. Kayla McCollum asking about Tyler Atkinson. How good do we feel about him? So my prediction on this is not worth very much, but I guess I do still feel pretty good about Atkinson coming to Georgia. I think where I put myself in the same spot as some of you, and I've even said this to Jeff on air, I think the recruiting analysts have a really tough job right now, and I mean this across the various websites, in that fans get really mad at these guys right now. Fans get really mad because they get obviously sold the process of, hey, Georgia's in a great spot, or whoever it might be. Let's just use Georgia as the for instance. Georgia's in a great spot. Georgia's the likely winner here. Nothing's changed. Georgia's still in a good spot, but at the last second, sort of everything can change, and so. In a case like this, I'm sort of on guard for anything. But as of now, it seems like Georgia's probably doing pretty well. So I guess now they have the thing online where you can make the prediction with low confidence. The low confidence part doesn't always get reported in various moments. But nonetheless, my prediction with low confidence would be Atkinson to Georgia. Zebco33 says my tech teacher is it Ian Saunier, is how you say it, was the kicker on the team at Georgia Southern when they won the last one a national title back in the early 2000s. That's really cool. What a fun thing that is. Really, really fun. That's good stuff. Good stuff. I miss Georgia Southern being a 1AA school. I really do. And I guess I'd be curious for those who are big Georgia Southern fans, and I'm sure we have a good number of Georgia Southern fans that probably watch our show. There's a little bit of overlap with this sometimes. Like, since Georgia Southern has moved to FBS, are they happier? Are they are they better for it? They've been to a few bowl games, I guess. And I'm actually not belittling Georgia Southern. I think Georgia Southern's got a real following, a real fan base. What does it say about Paulson Stadium? Is it the biggest little stadium? Is that the thing they say? Something like that. Like, I'm not anti-Georgia Southern necessarily. I really like it. And I like, because like my big thing is that there are a lot of players in Georgia who are good enough to play college football, and they're not really getting scholarship offers right now. So I want Georgia Southern and Georgia State and Mercer, like Kennesaw State. I want those programs to be viable options. So I'm pro Georgia Southern. I really am. But I would be curious for those who are like hardcore, Statesboro guys. Maybe we'll get maybe we'll bring Cole Swindell on the show. Maybe we'll ask him. Is the life of a Georgia Southern fan better as a member of the FBS? Because, we're just sitting here rattling off. I remember Adrian Peterson. You could obviously go back to the Eric Russell age. Like, Georgia Southern used to be a blast. It used to be so much fun. Rivalry with Furman. We've lost so much from like what we now call FCS. And honestly, there's some good football still being played there now. It's all in the weird places. It's like the Dakotas and the Montana schools, which in a way it's kind of cool, which is actually really fun. But I wish a lot of these teams at the bottom of FBS that are sort of hanging on for a paycheck that ain't ever coming, I wish they'd just go back to FCS and just make that really fun again. D says, I'm always prepared for heartbreak during recruiting. Can't get them all. Yeah. That's what's funny is like, just the law of large numbers. Like, Georgia has clean house of recruiting over the course of the Kirby Smart era. But if I wanted to do a week's worth of shows about recruits that Georgia didn't get and the stories about how Georgia didn't get them, even with as much success as Georgia's had, even back pre, whatever the modern age is, I'm talking about early days of Kirby Smart, they still weren't getting everybody then. So you're kind of always on guard for that. And, oh yeah, Jeremy Harbin mentioned another one, like App State. Like, when App State, Armani Edwards at quarterback, that was fun, man. Boone, North Carolina, great spot. Yeah, Jeremy also shouting out South Dakota, North Dakota. Yeah, so you've got essentially 4 schools, at least 3 schools in the Dakotas. So North Dakota State, famous, but like now North Dakota, completely different school, is also really good, I think. I know both the South Dakota schools, South Dakota and South Dakota State. They're both really good. I don't know if they're not the Fighting Sioux anymore. Whatever North Dakota is now, they're not the Sioux anymore. But I don't know if they're good, but I know that both South Dakota schools are good. And then like both the Montana schools are good. Like all the stuff that sort of looks like Yellowstone, the TV drama, all of like the Yellowstone area, that's all like really good stuff. Let us see what else. Chris Jacobs says, I went to a Georgia Southern function with a buddy once, and when the professor and the people we met found out I went to Georgia, they were all boo and say stuff like we have a rival. I didn't even know we had B. I think there is probably some of that. When I was a kid, I rooted for Georgia Southern. Eric Russell was the defensive coordinator. Was the head coach. And I'm not old enough to have known Russell while he was at Georgia, but I think a lot of us sort of viewed our guy going there, great sense of pride. They were the first school to ever go 15-0. I think a lot of Georgia fans like Georgia Southern. I think you are right that like hardcore Statesboroites do think of themselves having a rivalry with Georgia. And to be completely honest, and I, sort of forced to share my candid thoughts, one of the most embarrassing moments I've ever suffered through at Sanford Stadium was the 2015 game against Georgia Southern, where Georgia won in overtime and celebrated like it had won the Rose Bowl. That was humiliating. but also easily forgotten because a lot of good stuff has happened since then. But a humiliating experience to see Georgia celebrating that way for winning an overtime game against Georgia Southern. Even relatively meager version of Georgia was still like a 17-point favorite that day. It's like, let's be careful with that. But overall, I don't have beef with Georgia Southern really. In fact, I hope they do well. I guess though, I would say that I would typically root for, they have the rivalry with State. They have the Southern not State, State not Southern. That's kind of the rivalry. I guess my instinct, because I'm more of a rural guy than a big city guy, my instinct would be to root for Southern over State. But now that Del McGee is the coach at State, I guess I'd have to root for him over Southern. I guess my allegiance in that rivalry has now probably changed, now that I think about it. By the way, Foster Moss kind of pointing out that Georgia back in 2015 is just lucky he didn't become Florida. And boy, I remember that day. I remember when Georgia Southern beat Florida. That was fun. Now, what I hate about that is like, all this stuff sort of makes, for weird bedfellows every now and then. It's like, I loved Florida losing to Georgia Southern, but Will Muschamp was also the coach that day. And I do obviously have great respect for Coach Muschamp. So I'm glad that Muschamp is not on the other side of whatever game Georgia's playing, because I really like Will Muschamp a lot. And I never really liked having to go against him. But I did enjoy watching Florida beat Georgia Southern. I did enjoy that. Chris Jacobs said he always hoped Georgia Southern did well. Yeah. First of all, FCS playoffs, ton of fun. And back in the day, really fun. Because it seems like you don't hear as much anymore about remember Delaware? Delaware wing tee offense. You don't hear as much about Delaware anymore, I don't think. Some of the teams that used to be good in FCS, it seems like they're not quite around as much anymore. You don't hear as much about that.
Shout out to Georgia Southern for having the 87th best rivalry in college football, according to the athletics list that came out.
So they did 100 of those things?
They did 100 of them.
Wow, that'd be
They ranked Georgia Southern and App State, number 87, just ahead of Georgia and South Carolina at 85.
Boy, if you're South Carolina, you can't love that. For a long time, South Carolina probably viewed Georgia as its biggest SEC rival, and it's barely getting a mention above. I feel like... back in the day, App State and Georgia Southern was fun, but so that's good, I guess.
Georgia Tech did not make the list.
There you go. I've said before, the problem with the Georgia Tech rivalry is that both sides are passive aggressive about it, and you can't really be a rivalry if neither side wants to admit it's a rivalry. You can't be a rivalry if that's the case.
Tech tries to be aggressive with it because, they put all the profanity in the fight song and the chopping off the head and all that, but then they just don't show up.
Yeah, but they also are the first to pivot to, academics as if they're MIT.
I'm sorry, fact check. I overlooked. Georgia Tech 31.
Oh, that's not too bad. They're the first to pivot to academics as if they were MIT, and, we don't care about this sports ball stuff. We're too busy, I don't know. Whatever it is they do in those math classes don't have any numbers. It's all just, if you go on the classroom, look on the board, it's just all letters and little squigglies and sigmas and things like that. They're we don't care about this sports ball stuff. We're too busy, sort of dealing with these equations. So even they are pretty passive aggressive about the rivalry at times.
Georgia's top rival, Florida, number 12.
Which I would agree with. All right, let's get a few more here. Let me go to Facebook. I haven't been there yet. But I also started on Facebook yesterday too. So if I'm getting grief, it should be the record should reflect that we started on Facebook yesterday. We also spent a long time on Facebook yesterday too. While Facebook is pulling up, I'll also pop back over to DawgNation.com again. Oh yeah, also DT shouting out. Now, this is taking it back a minute, but back when Marshall was a 1AA school, when Donovan was the coach at Marshall, that was really fun. Because that's like, I mean, that's obviously Randy Moss, right? Am I remembering this correctly? Eric Kresser at quarterback, Moss. That's 1AA era for Marshall, right? With Jim Donnan. Yeah, that's a really fun 1AA team that doesn't exist anymore. And once again, now, I would say that Marshall, I mean, they have a decent following. But is their life really better for being like the whatever team in the Mid-American Conference, right? Or I guess in the American Athletic now. Like, is their life really better for that? I just don't know. Like, what if all these teams are sort of back in the FCS? And look, we got all kinds of like TV platforms now. You got to think somebody probably pay for that. I mean, you got to think they would, especially as much gambling goes on with all this kind of stuff.
Marshall in the Sun Belt.
In the Sun Belt?
Yes.
Excuse me. I'm usually, you can tell we're a long way away from the season because I'm usually pretty good at that sort of thing. All right, let's get a few on Facebook here for a moment. Ken Holcomb says that Eric Russell was a great defensive coordinator. It was great watching on the sidelines. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's one of those things that by reputation I know very well. Blood trickling down the forehead. Obviously we've cited before in the show, the legendary letter that he wrote to his team just prior to the 1980 season. One of the great, I mean, if you want to talk about societal decline, like there's no better example of that than this. The fact that sort of a hard-charging football coach that would butt heads with his players in their helmets until he himself bled, that a guy like that was also a proficient letter writer, like less than 50 years ago. Like, I don't think anything speaks to like societal decline more so than that, because ain't nobody seemingly writing letters anymore. But back in like the 1980s, as recently as that, our like toughest football coaches were also writing letters, like, longhand correspondence, and writing them very well. Like if you read the famous Russell letter, it's incredibly eloquent. It's beautiful prose. This was a defensive coordinator, and a tough one at that. And he's writing a letter. Like, I know this is a tired meme, but like we used to be a proper country. I mean, that there's no better example of that than this. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on here. Lucy Bowers Boykin said that she always pulled for App State when they played Southern. I guess I like Georgia Southern. I mean, if you have a tie to App State, then maybe you kind of like them too. That seems like a really cool program. But I've always had kind of a soft spot for Georgia Southern, I guess. Barry Watkins on rivalries. He says that he thinks that Texas is destined to be Georgia's top rival. I can't quite get there with you on that. I mean, but we have said before that Georgia and Texas can become rivals, playing as frequently as they perhaps could over the course of the next few years and have, last year, could this year, future years. You can turn something into a rivalry just by like putting the two sides, together on a frequent basis. But history would also dictate the Georgia-Florida rivalry is going to mean something again at some point in time. That, Georgia has certainly put its fiercest rivals into a tough spot, and Georgia has benefited from the success that it's had against Florida and Auburn in particular. But y'all, this stuff's just not destined to last forever. It's like, it's one of those things where eventually you beat a program bad enough, they become desperate enough that they make the moves they should have been making all along. I mean, that's the sort of thing that eventually happens. So the Georgia-Florida rivalry may seem passé now. People even sometimes ask us, how come you still do the Gator Hater Updater, given the fact that Florida is basically irrelevant? And as someone who's been living for a few years now, what I can tell you is that while Florida is down bad right now and has been for a while, and I think they probably will be this year too. Auburn is just, a complete embarrassment. These programs that you consider your true traditional rivals, Florida, we consider Georgia's biggest rivalry. It's the one we talk about every day. The sort of moribund status of that program is not likely to last forever. It's just not. Let us see what else. What else on Facebook? Yeah, and Barry also kind of mentioning the frequency with which Georgia and Texas play. I don't doubt they could be on their way to being a rivalry. I don't doubt that. I would balk at biggest rival, though. Because no matter what the SEC scheduling formula is set to look like for the future, Georgia and Florida will be playing no matter what. Like, there is a way in which if the SEC can't get agreement on a 9-game conference schedule, if you only play 8, there is a distinct possibility that Georgia and Auburn don't play every year moving forward. But in almost any situation, Georgia and Florida, in fact, I'm confident to say no matter what the schedule looks like, Georgia will always play Florida. Let's see what else. Randy also remembers the Furman Georgia Southern rivalry. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of fun. All right, anything else before we go? Back on YouTube one more time. John Hayes says, speaking of the Georgia Tech rivalry, a huge recruiting battle going on for Anthony Lonan. Yeah, I mean, that's a fun one to watch. It seems like Georgia really likes him. It does seem like Georgia really likes him. And obviously Georgia's trying to do some big things with that defensive line here right now. Anonymous handling the subject of DJ Lagway. We think that DJ Lagway is a good quarterback. We really do. We really do. We obviously don't think much of Florida as a team right now, but we do like Lagway as a quarterback. I think by the time we get to end of October, the Georgia-Florida situation, boy, it seems like there's a kind of a wide dispersion of what Florida could potentially look like there, for sure. Marvin Hall asking about Georgia and Alabama. I mean, listen, I always sort of think of Alabama as Georgia's nemesis. I don't quite think of Georgia-Alabama as a rivalry so much because, remember, there's almost no history with Georgia and Alabama, almost none. I'm talking about long-standing history. So any sort of relationship between the two teams is sort of Saban era forward. Prior to that, the two programs almost never existed within the same universe as each other. There have obviously been the most memorable games for Georgia, sort of center around for the good and the bad, against Alabama. So clearly they are a nemesis. They are the obstacle standing in the way of the success that you want to have. But for me, as of late, that doesn't quite feel like a rivalry yet. It just feels like something different. It is maybe the game that Georgia fans this season most want to win. But once again, even with that doesn't quite feel like rivalry. I think that Georgia and Alabama is a series, an ongoing series of games. My grandchildren may one day think of this as a rivalry because by then the two teams will have a lot more history with each other. But, in the Kirby Smart era, which is now going on 10 years, Alabama's never played in Athens. Hard to call something a rivalry when they've never even visited your stadium. I would say that. But I understand where the question comes from because of the nature of the games they've played. So that's why I'm a little bit more comfortable using a word like nemesis as opposed to rival when it comes to Alabama. Really fun conversation. We appreciate that. We'll come back and do it all again tomorrow. But between now and then, don't let your home get ruined by a really hot amount of weather we have on the outside here right now. Get your air conditioning tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at RS Andrews, so you'll have the peace of mind to know that your AC can make it through the rest of the summer that's still on its way. Or if disaster strikes, your AC goes out. Remember, for RS Andrews, the RS stands for Rapid Service. So if your AC does go out, well, our folks at RS Andrews can kind of rush, get it back into working condition, and get you cool and comfortable again, which is, after all, with it being as hot as it is right now, that's kind of a safety issue. So keep all of that in mind. It's online, rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. Story after story, they've been putting smiles on faces, and they can put a smile on your face as well. So make sure you check them out here today. Have a great day. We're back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. You can also see our friends on DawgNation at Large this evening. Kaylee Manziel, Cody Chafin's in for Connor Riley tonight, so that'll be a lot of fun. You'll see that. And as I said, back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.